Galloway is a wide, wild place where the raw edges of creation have not been rubbed down. It's often said that Galloway is Scotland's best kept secret, and if that is so, I think S.R.Crockett is probably Galloway's best kept secret. My goal is to let the secret out of the bag. For those of you who need an introduction, Samuel Rutherford Crockett was born Samuel Crockett, with one T, on the 24th of September 1859. The R came later, as did the additional T. He was born at Little Duckery in rural Galloway, the illegitimate son of dairymaid Annie Crockett. Brought up by his maternal grandparents, the family moved to Castle Douglas in 1867, and in 1876 the young Sam won the Galloway bursary, allowing him to study at Edinburgh University. He supplemented the bursary through a combination of tutoring and journalism. He died in France on April the 16th, 1914. And in between? Well, from 1894 until his death, he was one of the best known and widest read of the new breed of professional writers who took advantage of the revolution in mass market publishing. As well as hundreds of articles in magazines and periodicals, he had nearly 70 works published. He was represented by leading agent A.P. Watt, and he was one of the biggest celebrities of his day. What a difference a century makes. As recently as 50 years ago, parts of Galloway were still referred to as Crockett Country, and a century ago, the network of railways and emergence of tourism saw people flock there in search of the places made famous by her native son. Today, few people even in Castle Douglas are aware that it is the setting for Crockett's fictional Cairn Edward, which features in more than a handful of his works. The railways are gone. The tourists are tempted back by red kites and dark skies, but Crockett barely gets a look in. Yet Crockett, more than any other writer, put Galloway on the map. As late as 1923, the Scotsman notes, "In his pages we seem to smell the scent of the seaside and the woods and the hills, the fresh airs of heaven blow upon us. We are aware of the magic of the moonlight and the heat and the glare of the sun at noon. We feel the sharp, stinging cold of the early morning flow of the tide of the Solway. We know the black shadows under the cliffs and the silver of the reflected moon on the calm surface of Balcarry Bay." Crockett writes of the hills, the coast and the islands, as well as the villages and hamlets which scatter the rural landscape of Galloway. His landscape is populated by Covenanters, gypsies and smugglers, as well as a fair panoply of ordinary rural characters, herds, tenant farmers and dairymaids. The ministers, dominies and landowners are all lampooned where necessary, and the bigger characters of history are placed firmly in the background, in favour of the ordinary bonnet-laird heroes and feisty heroines of his fiction. In his time, Crockett made Stevenson homesick for Scotland, and he was credited with doing for Galloway what Scott did for Tweeddale and beyond. And yet, like the very landscape he describes, he has long been cast out into the wilderness. I first came across Crockett's writing more than 25 years ago, over which time I have become hefted to him as surely as he is to Galloway. The word heft perhaps requires an explanation in this context. Some may see it as an archaic term. It is certainly a distinctly rural term, and I am using it deliberately to suggest that there is as vital a relationship between Crockett's places and people as there was between Crockett himself and Galloway. Hefting is a traditional method of managing flocks of sheep on large areas of common ground and communal grazing. It's a process which takes some time. Initially, sheep have to be kept in an unfenced area of land by constant shepherding. Over time, it becomes learned behaviour, passed from ewe to lamb over succeeding generations. Lambs graze with their mothers on the heath belonging to their farm, instilling a lifelong knowledge of where optimal grazing and shelter can be found throughout the year. Crockett's ability to describe the natural world comes not just from a keen observation, but from something deeper, a sense of being part of the place he describes. Through a wide range of characters, from smugglers to dairymaids, he offers us an insight into this world. As a contemporary reviewer noted, "There's a sense of intimacy established between reader and author. The result is entirely pleasing." I believe the full depth of Crockett's skill cannot be appreciated until one understands the hefted nature of how his characters and his places work together. For too long, he was dismissed by urban modernists as escapist, while in actual fact, Crockett is a writer of sometimes radical rural realism. Why was he so dismissed? Jealousy and politics. Don't get me started. This is an argument I've been having for over a quarter of a century. Importantly, Crockett writes about ordinary rural folk because he is one of them. He writes about the landscape from the position not just as one who inhabits it, but as one who is of it. He is in no way aspirational, and he serves no master. Even while writing for the market, he manages to retain his unique voice and hefted nature. Under Crockett's pen, Galloway becomes a living, vibrant and extraordinary place, but not in a romanticised or escapist way. Crockett was a romancer, with a small r, in the Scots tradition, but he was a romancer of the ordinary people and their places. Landscape is always a key factor in Crockett, and to read his work, fiction and non-fiction, is to experience all the seasons of Galloway, from the beauty of a May morning to the harshness of a November storm. For example, his best-known novel, The Raiders, opens by taking us on a whistle-stop tour of the seasons. It was upon Rathen Head that I first heard their bridle reins jingling clear. It was ever my custom to walk in the full of the moon at all times of the year. Now the moons of the month are wondrously different. The moon of January, serene among the stars. That of February, wading among chill cloud banks of snow. Of March, dun with the mist of Muirburn, among the heather. Of early April, clean washed by the rains. This was now May, and the moon of May is the loveliest in all the year, for with its brightness comes the scent of flower buds and of young green leaves breaking from the quick and breathing earth. So it was, in the height of the moon of May, as I said, that I heard their bridle reins jingling clear, and saw the harness glisten on their backs. Crockett is just as eloquent at describing the local flora and fauna. This is a land of whops and bog myrtles. It is frequently called Grey Galloway, though those who know it better understand there is no contradiction in also referring to it as Bonnie Gallowa. Yet perhaps we most fully appreciate Crockett's skill when we experience it in the company of his characters. He writes in an episodic style. Much of his work was serialised before novelisation, and his use of narrator's voice is sophisticated and sometimes playful. He writes as easily from a female as a male perspective, and he breathes as much life into his characters as he does into the natural world around them. Like Crockett, his characters are hefted to their landscape. For Crockett, a sense of place involves people at least as much as it does landscape. The two cannot really be separated. For example, in his 1909 novel, Rose of the Wilderness, he writes, "They tell you that nobody is really alive to the beauty of their birthplace. Well, perhaps not for some time after. But in the long run, it depends on the person. For me, Rose Gordon of the dungeon in the uplands of Galloway, from my earliest years, I was glad of the large freshness of every breath I drew. Solitary? Why should I be? I had my father. I had books. Men did not often come there, it is true, save our great lob lie by the fire, Muckle Tampson. But on winter evenings, a stray shepherd or two would look in, each with 5 or 6 miles of trackless moorland to cover when he left our warm inglenook. To read Crockett today is to go on an adventure into the past. In the process, you can find characters who become friends and places that will stay with you forever. Anyone who has enjoyed Dickens or Stevenson or Scott can appreciate Crockett. And for Hardy lovers, that's the other writer who springs to my mind as being hefted to his world, Crockett should offer a familiar pleasure. I can't give you advice where to start your adventure. A unique relationship develops between writer and reader after all. But I have 2 favourite places in Crockett's work. One exists in fact, and one at least partly fiction. Both are set firmly in the Galloway Hills. Loch Enoch is central to the novel Silver Sand, the Raiders prequel. For many years it was a place I longed to see, having read Crockett's words, "Loch Enoch is the goal of our desire, For nights we have dreamed of its lonely fastnesses. Now they are immediately before us. Enoch is literally a lake in cloudland. And I was lucky enough to go there on the most perfect summer day in June 2019. I felt like Juliana in Silver Sand as she slips from her pony at the sight. She had not dreamed of finding anything so fair in the high wilderness of moor and mountain. So she went to walk by the waterside, fearing, as all must who look upon Enoch from a distance, that such beauty must vanish into nothingness, as when one walks towards the end of a rainbow. I can confirm the beauty did not vanish. My second favourite place is the Shield of the Dungeon of Buchan, which I have only visited from my armchair. It provides the opening for the Raiders' sequel, The Dark of the Moon. At the Shield of the Dungeon of Buchan, a strange place, half natural cavern, the rest a rickle of rude masonry plastered like a swallow's nest on the face of the cliff among the wildest of southern hills, this story begins. These are the places I am hefted to. I can heartily recommend Crockett's Galloway for anyone who enjoys finding a sense of place in their fiction. The secret is out. If you're looking for history, adventure and romance, look no further than Crockett's Galloway.